Hello, Garland Nixon here. We're hanging out with Scott Ritter. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, hanging out with Scott Ritter. And oh my gosh, there's lots of things to talk about. Before this gets going, I think we've got to address the elephant in the room, Scott. And I'm going to bring this to you because I think that the Brits here have hit on a story and overlook. Starving Russians recorded plotting to eat fellow troops. Starving Russian soldiers are cutting up and eating fellow troops amid ration shortage. An intercepted radio message. This is from Ukraine's GRU. Appears to show it's a sad state of affairs. They don't have money. They don't have weapons. They don't have support. They don't have anything. And it's like, to me, they should put that story out because it demonstrates all they have left is like to put something out so absurd that when you look at this, they're eating each other, really. I tell you one thing. I went to Moscow. All they need to do is go to Moscow. There's some pretty damn good restaurants there, and with lots of food. I find it hard to believe that the soldiers are eating each other.
Well, what you didn't realize, Garland, is that we were eating the soldiers too. I mean, look. I mean, we've gotten to the point of it's parody. I mean, it's bad parody. We have been engaged in a giant information operation from the very beginning of this conflict. I mean, we go back to Zelensky's statement, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. If you remember that, like early on when there was talk about people were going to fly him out of Kiev to save his life. It now turns out that he never said that. In fact, he was cowering in a basement when that happened. It was scripted by a CIA officer who literally then said it to the press. And later on, the Washington Post, I believe, had to admit it, that this was given to them by an intelligence officer at the U.S. Embassy, who wasn't anywhere near Zelensky. This is the reality, though. Zelensky, the Ukrainians have been, engaged in this giant, psychological warfare operation from the very start. And what we're seeing now is that, they can't spin things out of where they currently are. It's just so bad for them. So they just have to make things up and get into the ridiculousness. Their goal right now is to seize headlines and to generate clicks in hope that somehow it creates, they can get some traction politically, because, they're not trying to win this war. That's ended a long time ago. They're trying to run out the clock. For them, the clock is a political clock. It deals with U.S. midterm elections. And their goal is to hang on until midterm elections and then hope that they're able to, get a result that's good for them, get the Democrats taking the House of Representatives, for instance, and then the Democrats can then stymie Trump with impeachment and everything else, the tactics they did the first time around. So that's what they're doing now. But, you don't help your cause when you put forward stupidity such as this. And so that just shows how utterly desperate they are right now, that they're resorting to the worst kind of vile propaganda. It goes back to some of the things that were said about the Germans early on in World War I. If you remember, when they marched through Belgium, the Germans were bayoneting babies and eating babies and doing all this but basically the Belgians had collapsed and they didn't, and all they had left was stories to tell. And that's all the Ukrainians have left, are stories to tell.
One of the things I think that's interesting now, you're familiar with, there was a Reuters article about, the Russians are coming, the usual, they're coming across the Savinky Gap or whatever, and then they're going to get us all, right? But although they're starving and eating each other, but somehow they're going to, I guess you get enough energy from eating a Russian that now you can attack all of NATO and take that down. Okay. Reuters story says that, And then Tulsi Gabbard comes out and says, that's a pile of crap. It's lies. And I thought it was great. Now, here's something interesting I'm going to throw on top of that. So now we get this. Boris Pistorius. Putin's not interested in a war with NATO, right? In my estimation, Putin's not interested in waging a full-scale world war against NATO. He wants to destroy NATO from within by undermining its unity. Well, that ain't going to be hard. But my point is, though he has to throw the old, he wants to, I don't know, undermine our unity, whatever, he has to come out and say, look, I mean, it seems to me maybe, I don't know, maybe the Russians are squeezing the Germans. Maybe they're starting to face the truth. Maybe they're recognizing they don't have any money to give. I don't know. But now when Pistorius, a hawk like him, comes out and says, yeah, we got to admit it. They're not, because if the Russians aren't going to attack, all this business about we got to get ready for war with Russia goes right out the window, doesn't it?
Yes and no. I mean, the problem is Pistorius is saying this, but what he's not saying is we're not going to militarize. I think one of the problems is the inherent contradictions of the whole NATO messaging on Russia. I mean, on the one hand, the Russians are suffering unbelievable casualties and they're eating their own. And they've got nothing left. There's the total disarray, etc. And on the other hand, they're going to roll through Ukraine and come into Europe and it's all done. I think what Pistorius is reflecting is reality, because here's the thing. It's one thing for politicians to sit there and articulate nonsense, which they do on a regular basis. It's another thing for politicians to come to a legislative branch and ask for money when there is no money, and when there are other political challenges out there. And I think what Pistorius is recognizing is that the German parliament isn't going to buy into this nonsense. The German parliament is going to be asking questions. And it's better that you come to the German parliament with a little bit of integrity, what's left of integrity, and being honest. So if you're going to ask for money to militarize, you should be saying that we are concerned about Russia's potential down the road, et cetera. We're afraid that, a Russian victory in Ukraine would encourage them to perhaps consider other things. But no, as things stand, Russia's not preparing to attack NATO, because that's the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So he's saying it, but it just shows you again that there's a messaging problem. Why is there a messaging problem? Because they're in absolute panic right now, absolute panic. You can't be asking for money for the military if Russia's not getting ready to invade Europe. And yet they need this money to justify. We're looking at a European continent in crisis. It's an economic crisis, it's a political crisis, and it's a societal crisis. And I think, Pistorius is starting to recognize that, you've got to inject a modicum of reality into your policy postures, or else they'll just be dismissed as ridiculous. And if you're asking for money for the military and you go to the parliament and immediately they just say the entire premise of your of your budget requirements is a lie, Russia's not getting ready to attack, it makes it difficult to ask for the money. So I think what Pistorius is doing is just trying to align the request with reality so that it doesn't get rejected out of hand by parliament.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think there's another maybe reason to pump the brakes, and that is what's happening on the actual line of contact. And that is there's, not so slow motion a collapse anymore. And you're soon going to face the point where Ukraine has been defeated. And you've said to the people of Europe, well, as soon as they get finished, they're going to head on across the Polish border and off they go, and they're going to keep going, Romania, you name it. And then they don't. And how do you explain that? You've been telling these people for the last 4 years that as second they conquer Ukraine, they're coming for us, and they stop and they don't come for us. And the people are going to be, okay, when are the Russians coming? Well, okay, maybe we were a little, exaggerated just a smidgen with the whole Russian hordes coming thing. And I think they got to kind of think about that to some extent, maybe.
Except if they did build a military, they could say they didn't come because we built the military. They didn't come because we're building a handful of tanks, so we can't build many more because we don't have money. But because we were building a few tanks, the Russians got scared. So thank you guys for. Look, these are politicians. They're going to lie 3 ways from Sunday. The truth has never been something that they've been, it's never been part of their resume. So, but I think the problem is the lies they're telling. Look, I just signed a book contract, just so everybody knows, and it's a book on Ukraine and the end of NATO. Basically,
that one kind of writes itself.
Yeah, well, I was holding off on it because I've been thinking about this book for some time now. But when I crunch the numbers, I'm always, NATO. There's a scenario here where NATO could survive. But when I look at all the factors that go into NATO's long-term health, it's a terminal patient now. It's irreversible. They're on hospice and they're going to die. And Ukraine will be the reason for their death. When Ukraine collapses, and it will, that will be the end of NATO, because everything that NATO has reimagined itself to be. And I just want to remind your audience, it wasn't too long ago that NATO was in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was the big thing. That was it. That was how NATO defined itself. We are an adjunct of America's global, posture. When America needed us in Afghanistan, even though there's no border with Europe, but we came because America asked, and we're going to go into the Pacific, and we're going to go everywhere. We're going to go into the Middle East. We're in North Africa. We're going everywhere because we're global like America. We're attached to America. And then America went, it was hilarious. In 2021, we still were having the Europeans go around raising money to support their Afghan things, telling them, you got to get the money out of your parliaments. A lot of political capital was expended to get the money to fund this Afghanistan adventure. And then all of a sudden we went, oh yeah, we're out of here. Goodbye. You're on your own. Literally, you're on your own. Literally, we didn't coordinate with them. We just said, we're gone. Good luck. That was the end of NATO right there. The NATO was demoralized. They were abandoned by the United States, betrayed by the United States. And yet what they did to turn this around was to create Ukraine, the Ukraine crisis, and to immediately, because you saw as soon as we left, now we're immediately about troops moving on the border. We got to, we got to, train up, get the Ukrainians to attack, the whole thing. Why? Because NATO needed an enemy, needed a threat. And NATO has put everything into this Ukraine gambit, and it's failed. It's the end of NATO. They literally can't survive this, and they won't survive this. This will break them up. This has bankrupted them, and it will demonstrate that the United States and Europe don't see eye to eye anymore about national security policies. And without the United States, there is no NATO. And so, yeah, NATO's dead.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that the problem that there is a concern that I have, and that is, Germany and France and Europe never, and Germany, France, and the UK never played well together in the sandbox. And if they can't fight Russia, they'll fight themselves. My fear is if they don't have anybody else to fight, that the nobility in those countries are so looted and crazy and reckless that they'll say, well, I think I think the UK's out to get us again. No, it's Poland. No, it's Germany, and they'll start fighting themselves. But I'll tell you this much: if they do, US ain't coming back into that one. Am I crazy to think such a thing? Looking at these people historically,
I think the United States is done with Europe. The national security strategy, even though it's a Trump, even the Biden administration, if you remember when they wrote their national security strategy first time, they were locked in on the rules-based international order in America, democracy, everything. But they published that. But near the end, you started hearing Biden, even Tony Blinken was saying, we can't do it all. We need, people to lift their fair share of the burden, et cetera. So there was a growing recognition, even amongst the globalists, that America, couldn't go it alone. Europe is becoming such a problem now that I think even the Democrats, even the globalists, even the deep state is going to be compelled to distance themselves from you. It's going to get ugly. We may be at war with Denmark. very soon. The president just appointed a former governor of Louisiana as his special envoy for for Greenland. And he said, we're taking Greenland. And I happen to believe him. I happen to believe that by the time Trump leaves office, Greenland will have been seized by the United States. And what's Denmark going to do? Go to war against us? I mean, they've already said we're the number one threat to their security. What's that do for Europe? And what's that signal does that send to Europe? Now, Denmark isn't going to go to war with us because they would lose that war. But what happens if we carry out an act of aggression against Greenland? How does Article 5 play into that? All this, we are breaking a relationship that, frankly speaking, needs to be broken. Europe is a dysfunctional entity as it's currently configured in the European Union. We need Europe to return to the collection of sovereign states, and each one with their own foreign policy, et cetera. That's how it worked in the 1980s. We didn't have a European Union; we had a NATO, but each nation had its own policies. I think we're headed in that direction, but in order to do that, there's going to be haves and have-nots. If you remember, Rumsfeld talked about old Europe and new Europe back in 2003. Well, we're going to be talking about the same sort of thing, but we're going to be talking about the Europe that embraces democracy, at least as American envisions it, and the Europe that doesn't. This is becoming an issue. Freedom of speech is a fundamental core American value. And you can't be America's friend in Europe. You can't call yourself an ally if you're suppressing free speech. And yet the European Union just singled out Jacques Beau, a Swiss colonel who's been one of the better analysts, one of the best analysts out there about this conflict. They've singled him out for punishing sanctions designed to ruin his life, deplatform him. And why? Because he was telling the truth about the conflict in Ukraine. That's not free speech. And I think you're going to see that this is going to be one of the fundamental areas where America and Europe diverge. And it will be a sharp divergence, a strategic divergence will lead to an absolute rupture.
Yeah, I kind of have a feeling that a few countries like Slovakia and Hungary and a few of these countries that have maintained their integrity and their dedication to the connection between the people of the country and the leadership of the country are going to kind of make out okay, because they'll still be able to get they're right on the Russian border. Hey, we got some gas. The Russians will be like, yeah, sure, we got some extra gas. We can take care of you. If they get a call from France, we got some extra. No, we got nothing for you, pal. Don't call back. Let me ask you this. The state of affairs, as I always say, every day, it used to be, I'd say this, every day I wake up and I read that another village that I can't pronounce has fallen, right? Yeah, it ain't a village anymore. It is a region, an oblast, thousands of people encircled. To me, I don't know how long they can maintain any level of morale amongst the troops at the rate of decline that we're seeing, as far as these dug in areas just falling, dropping like bowling pins.
Yeah, I mean, again, what we're seeing is it's a collapse across the but people are like, well, how come there's not big red lines? That's not the way this people need to come to grips with the reality of drone warfare. It's a completely different reality, and the Ukrainians are really, really good at it. Russia's winning now because Russia has, devised tactics that it's able to, employ across the battlefield. Tactics of situational domination of a given area of the battlefield. But it's not easy. The Ukrainians fight hard. And they use drones very effectively, and they're able to get on situational dominance in certain areas of the battlefield on occasion. So the Russians can't be doing big arrows and all this. The Russians take a village here, take a village there, and they chip away at everything. The Russians created this unit called Rubicon, and Rubicon is a elite drone unit whose job is to kill Ukrainian drone operators. So wherever the Ukrainians build a drone wall or they start to put together, effective drone operations, Rubicon comes in and kills them all. And the Ukrainians are scared to death of Rubicon. They don't have a solution for Rubicon. And as the Russians, take this unit, right now it's a fire brigade unit, but as they, train more people up, they'll have Rubicon hunter-killer teams all up and down the front. And that's the end of the Ukrainians. And once you take away the Ukrainian drone coverage, then you're going to see total collapse of the Ukrainian front line. The only thing that's holding the Ukrainians together right now, frankly speaking, is the drones and their willingness. Another headline that people aren't picking up, but Australia just ended up sending, I forget what it was, 53 Abrams tanks or something of that nature, 48 maybe. And these tanks aren't ready for battle. There's a lot of things that has to happen, but they're being destroyed right now around Pokrovsk because the Ukrainians are launching counterattacks because they don't have enough infantry anymore to launch counterattacks. They grab this armor that hasn't been up armored, hasn't been given the counter drone protection, and they're just throwing it into the battlefield, and the Russians are killing it. And so, the drones and then Ukraine's willingness to sacrifice everything to carry out, these counterattacks on certain segments of the front are the only thing that's keeping the Ukrainians in the fight. But these counterattacks are grinding through equipment that they don't have to replace and further, weakening their manpower reserves. And then when you take away the drones with Rubicon and others, there's nothing left. And so you're seeing every day, as you said, it's not a village liberated. It's, several villages, a region, deep penetrations. This is just not good for Ukraine, and it's not good for Europe. That's why they have to tell lies, because if they have to rely upon the truth, it would be a problem.
Well, and speaking of villages, Odessa ain't a village. But I'm getting it's clear. Well, for a while, I have felt that so many Black Sea attacks were coming from Odessa. I recall before the conflicts, before the SMO started, the Brits were saying, we're going to build a base near Odessa on the Black Sea. And I thought then, I don't think the Russians were going to let that happen. I never saw a universe in which the Russians could allow that to happen. But based on the attacks that have been launched and all the things that have been happened, I think it's obvious now. And based on what's going on now, I don't think the Russians per se want to necessarily come in and fight street to street in Odessa. But I think they have a plan. And I don't think this war ends without Odessa. And in my opinion, I felt this way for a long time, a land bridge to Transnistria. I think that's all written in the cards. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't think you're wrong. I think that the Russians are letting the Ukrainians write this book for them. Right now the Russians are engaged in, good faith negotiations with the United States about how to bring this conflict to an end, at least good faith on the part of Russia. But I think the Russians are also betting on Ukraine saying no. There are just certain things, for instance, the size of the Ukrainian army. There ain't going to be more than 50,000 Ukrainians in the post-conflict army. But Ukraine's saying they want 800,000. That happens to be the same number that Europe wants because, even though Ukraine can't be part of NATO, Europe is saying that the Ukrainian army is the first army of Europe, NATO trained, fully capable of taking on missions. How do you expect Russia to say, yeah, we're good with stopping this and 800,000 NATO trained soldiers is a good thing too? No, isn't going to happen. And so that's a killer. The territory, Russia will take the territory it wants to take. Whether Ukraine wants it or not, it's happening as we speak. Of course, it would be the easiest thing, but politically, Russia knows that Zelensky can't survive if he gives up the territory. And Zelensky's not in the business of just walking away. There's too much corruption going on. That's the other thing people need to understand is that this corruption in Ukraine is monitored by the Russians and exploited by the Russians who use it to their advantage. And therefore, people are like, why aren't they killing Zelensky? Why would you kill Zelensky? Zelensky is an agent of chaos. He's not the good thing that everybody thinks he is. He is bad for the alliance. He's bad for the Ukrainians. He has them do stupid things like throw away 2 elite brigades in a pocket south of Pokrovsk. These guys can't escape now. They're all dying. They're all dead. These are thousands of NATO trained soldiers that will never come back now. Not even, they're not going to have a chance to retreat. They're just dead. And that's Zelensky's fault. And so, you leave Zelensky in, but the Russians now, I think, are comfortable with the fact that this war is going to end militarily, and there will be a breakthrough. If you take a look at what's happening in Zaporozhye right now, around a town whose name I can't pronounce, Rulialpo or something of this nature. When this town fails, which has been the centerpiece of the Ukrainian defenses in this area, when it falls, and it's falling right now, there's nothing backing them up. And the Russians will then advance, get across the river, and they can pivot and they can start threatening the right bank of Kherson, Nikolaev, and now you're looking at Odessa. And I agree with you. I don't see the Russians doing street-to-street fighting. What I see the Russians doing is bypassing Odessa and going straight to the Transnistria border and establishing that link. And then basically, telling the Ukrainians that, you got to leave Odessa. You don't get to stay. And the fact that the general staff published a map that shows just that is telling. Maybe the politicians haven't put it down as an official, requirement for peace, but the Russian military seems to have, has a different set of orders that say this is the end state that we're looking for. Odessa, all the way up to the Transnistria border.
Speaking of one more thing of NATO, here's something interesting. Norway soldiers lack basic winter gear as the NATO nations' military leaders have prioritized sending aid to Ukraine, according to Forsvarsforum Forum, a media outlet published by the Norwegian Armed Forces main trade union. They're facing shortages of items essential for operating in cold climate. Well, that ain't good for Norway. They got no wooden underlayers. Yeah, that's a bad thing. So the bottom line is, it's kind of what we already knew. We're all this talk, we're ready to fight the Russians or what have you. They've stripped themselves. Their covers are bare. They've taken things that they had. Now they're taking things that don't even work anymore. They've taken everything that they've had and they've thrown it into Ukraine. And even this rhetoric of we'll fight Russia, not only do they not have anything, they don't have money to restock their shelves, much less to restock their shelves and then regenerate a whole new generation of equipment to fight Russia. They're naked as can be.
Yeah, there's just a lot of what ifs and a lot of betting on the come, so to speak. To use a Las Vegas term. How do you say you're going to? You have to build up a defense industry. This is what it all is. So everything is predicated on building a defense industry, but your industrial base is gone. Volkswagen is closed down in Germany. Volkswagen has closed down in Germany. The Rheinmetall, which produces tanks and stuff, they lost the foundry that produces the military quality armor plating. So now they have to buy it from Sweden. But Sweden's in the midst of its own modernization because they joined NATO with one of the smallest militaries imaginable. And now they're realizing, oh my goodness, we have to have a military. And so the price has gone through the roof. And they can't even build the chassis in the numbers necessary to modernize their own force. This is just a whole bunch of wishful thinking. There's a bunch of people publishing papers with numbers and with goals and objectives that cannot be matched by the reality of the deteriorating defense industrial base of Europe. One of the problems that they have is that they have never been called upon to do the kind of general industrial mobilization that is needed right now. What's needed right now is what the United States did after Pearl Harbor, where we just basically, we were pumping out Model Ts one day, and next day we're pumping out Shermans, and we just keep pumping out Shermans because that's all we pump out. Bombers. When the war ended, they had ships heading to Europe because we just turned the switch on to full automatic. And when the war ended, we had ships, Liberty ships, heading to Europe, loaded with tanks and airplanes, and they literally rolled these tanks off the ship to empty them out to go pick up the troops and bring them home. We had fields of bombers that were built but never deployed, fields of fighters. Because the machine just kept producing it. The same thing with the Soviet Union. How they had a very difficult task. They had to relocate much of their defense industry, to the east because of the Nazi invasion. But once they got it dug into Siberia and the Urals, they started pumping things out, and they just pumped things out. This is the kind of defense industrialization that would have to take place in Europe today. The problem is Europe. What is it? Kalas and Ursula like to run around and talk about Europe. There ain't no Europe. It's fake. You have different countries with different industrial capabilities, but they operate independent. There's not a unified purchasing. And what happens is the contracts that are needed to do this industrialization, this militarization, these contracts require new plants to be built, new people to be recruited. See, Europe hasn't been able to do it all throughout the Ukraine war because, they keep saying we need this many things. And they're going, oh, that ain't enough for us to build up a whole new production line. So no, we're not doing that. Now what they need is the European Union to come in with a big buy budget, but they don't have a big buy budget because they don't buy European, they buy individual states, and not enough states are agreeing to this. So, the Rheinmetall can't build the industrial space needed because there won't be the investment needed to do that, to train new people, to acquire the material, to build a supply chain that's sustainable. Right now, Europe operates, annual budget to annual budget. To do this kind of industrialization, you actually have to have about a 10-year plan where everybody is, investing into achieve that. These economies are failing, so they can't commit to a 10-year plan right now. And even if they tried to, the social safety net, right now, the pensions are gone. All those people that work their whole life trying to, nope, you're going to have to work again. You're going to, you thought you were going to retire. You thought you were going on your 4-week vacation to Spain. Nah, you got to come back and flip burgers at McDonald's because you got to make ends meet.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I think they're in a world of deep and serious trouble, and they don't know. Well, none of these leaders, if they make a 10-year plan, most of these people ain't going to make 10 months, to be frank. Well, Scott, thanks a lot. I certainly appreciate it. Yeah, take some time out, and everybody go to. Oh, let me just hit this real quick before we go. I think it's important. Before we go, what do people need to know, Scott, about ScottRitter.com, what they can find there, what you're working on, etc.?
Well, ScottRitter.com is the one-stop shop. It takes you to my Substack, and then on my Substack, you have a variety of tabs. I've been publishing a lot of the Russia House interviews. We just finished up the last of the interviews I did while I was in Moscow with Garland, and now I've done 2 more interviews. Did a very interesting one with Sergei Karaganov. He's a very important, political scientist whose voice is heard by the Kremlin and heard by everybody. And then I also did a fantastic interview with a Russian chess master on the day that the International Chess Federation made the decision to allow Russians to compete under their flag and if they win to play their anthem. It was a big deal. I'm 2 articles into a 5-article series on basically the modern day Christmas Carol, but it starts off focused on Christopher Ford. He's a former arms control official who basically oversaw the end of the INF Treaty. And I start from there and I walk people through the failures of American arms control and where it's gotten us. And, we'll finish up with the ghosts of Christmases to be. And I'm here to tell you right now, that's not a good thing. Garland, I don't know if you saw in China, there was a Chinese outlet that published a paper that's based upon American war game results. And they tied it to, threats made by American generals on Kaliningrad and what the Russians said in response. Just so your audience knows that this paper, which is very well written, grounded, within 5 hours, 35 to 60 million Europeans will be dead if they attack Kaliningrad. That's where we are. That's the ghosts of Christmases to be. And then the question that has to be asked by the United States and by American leadership is the question that was asked by Sergei Karaganov. Is America going to sacrifice Boston for Poznan? Meaning that when the Russians blow up a Polish city using a nuclear weapon because of the stupidity of Poland, what's America going to do? And the answer is, from the mindset of many Russians, is nothing. That America is not going to sacrifice itself for Europe anymore. I don't know if that's the truth, and it's a hell of a gamble, because if we do decide to engage in this thermonuclear war, and we're all going to die. But that's where we are today, because people like Christopher Ford and other Americans, Rose Gutemiller, they don't believe in arms control. They don't believe in stability. They only believe in American hegemony and the sole remaining superpower that we get to dictate all outcomes to everybody. And that's just not the world we live in anymore. So that's the five-part series of articles that I'm publishing. I'm 2 in. I'll try and publish one each day up through Christmas. And I'll just keep writing and doing some videos and such. So I want to wish everybody, including you, Garland, a very happy holidays, very Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. And we accomplished a lot this year, and I'm really looking forward to the coming year. A lot of good stuff's going to happen.
Same here. I'm looking forward to getting back to Moscow. Can't wait. Getting back to Russia. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Make sure you share this on all your social media platforms. Make sure you go to scottritter.com and make sure that you do everything you can to help support Scott so he can continue his important work.